Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'een. This is Rami Nsour. I'm here at the Taiba Foundation office in Union City, California. And this is the first video of a three-part series diving into the ocean of the Quran using the text of Imam Ghazali, the jewels of the Quran, Jawahirul Quran as our guide. Just want to make sure it is okay. Somebody can comment on the comments and just say if the live feed is okay, and then we'll get started. All right. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We're going to be going over, or actually I shouldn't say going over, but rather giving an introduction to the book of Imam al-Ghazali called The Jewels of the Quran. And all right, The Jewels of the Quran. So this is a text that is somewhat short in comparison to some of the other books that Imam al-Ghazali wrote, and it's very dense. And it's a book that I picked up one time years ago, and I looked through it, and at first, as I was reading it, I could find that there was a lot in there, but it really sorry. So last Ramadan, I picked it up as one of my studies of the Quran during Ramadan. I learned this tradition of focusing on the Quran through my studies in West Africa, in the Mahdara, in Mauritania. One of my shuyukh, Murabat Muhammad al-Amin, as we got closer to the month of fasting, Ramadan, he said, "What are you going to be studying during Ramadan?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be continuing my studies of fiqh." He said, "Rami, the Quran, Ramadan is the month of the Quran. Focus your studies on the Quran." And so that's what I've been trying to do since, and that's what I did at that time. I studied was memorizing the Quran and studying some books on purification, since the Quran is a form of purification. Ramadan is a time of purification. So I chose last year to go through Imam al-Ghazali's book, the Jawahir al-Quran, and it was amazing. It really, for me, made it that much closer for me to approach the Quran and to have a deeper understanding. So we should try this every Ramadan. So this book, Jawahir al-Quran, there's a few translations available, and I encourage you to purchase one of them and to read through it. Or if you have the Arabic, if you have access, if you can read the Arabic, to read the Arabic. And but as I said, it's pretty dense, and I hope that through these three lessons, it's giving you an introduction so that when you read the book, it'll make that much more that much more sense. So we're going to begin with what Imam al-Ghazali, the reason why he chose jewels of the Quran is that he is going to reach out, he's going to show each type of ayah in the Quran and categorize them first into 6 categories that break down into 10 categories, and each one of those 10 categories will have a symbol, jewels, and there's a couple of other symbols that we use as well. And he's going to say, as you read each verse in the Quran, you can look at it through this lens and you'll be able to identify it. Once you identify it, you see the patterns, you see what's going on, and it'll make the purpose of the Quran and the secret of the Quran that much clearer to you. And he called it the jewels of the Quran because he's going to use as symbols various jewels, but also because the Quran is an ocean, an endless ocean with no shore. An ocean without shores. And as we dive into it, just like a diver goes into the ocean to look for treasures, to look for pearls and so forth, so too when we dive into the Quran, we want to pull out these pearls. So he said, he begins by saying that there are 6 six categories. The first category, and it's the most important category, is the category of understanding Allah. Understanding Allah. And he said, this is the secret of all those secrets that we're going to uncover in the Quran. The secret of all of these secrets is understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this jewel, it's made up of three sub-jewels. He said, but he gave the name of this jewel. This is al-kibrit al-ahmar, the red sulfur. Or when you look up this from the subject of alchemy, it's called the Philosopher's Stone. And we're not talking about the Harry Potter series, but it's taken from this tradition, because what basically happened was when the Muslims were exposed to the tradition of alchemy and what they were trying to do, the scholars of the purification of the heart, they took some of that terminology because they said this fits perfectly with the message that we're trying to convey. So what were the alchemists trying to do? The alchemists were trying to take non-precious metals, add something to it, and turn that non-precious metal, like gold or iron, into a precious metal. Sorry, a non-precious metal like lead or iron, and turn it into a precious metal like gold or silver. So we have the non-precious metal, we have the elixir, which comes from an Arabic word, el-iksir. El-iksir. If you're going to transliterate it, A-L-I-K-S-I-R. So we have el-iksir, we have the original thing. We put this iksir onto the non-precious metal, and it changes into a new form. So the Muslims were exposed to this tradition of alchemy. They actually gave the name. So alchemy comes from the word alchemia, which comes from a Persian word. And elixir is an Arabic word, and that's where we get elixir from. Sorry, this is just I have some phlegm. It's not COVID related, alhamdulillah, just something I get very, very often. Normally I wouldn't mention it, but I know in these times, sometimes people are asking. In another video, I had a student actually reach out to me and said, I hope you're okay. And I said, well, no, if you listen to a lot of my old videos, you'll see the same thing. Okay, so we have el-iksir, the elixir. We have the non-precious metal. Now this elixir, this elixir, what is it? This, according to the alchemists, which we also get chemistry from alchemia and alchemy and so forth, this elixir is the Philosopher's Stone, is the al-kibrit al-ahmar. And it's something that's never been found. So like they say in Arabic, something is so rare, it's like al-kibrit al-ahmar. Yudhkar wa la yura. It's mentioned, but it's never found. So, so Imam Ghazali and others like him borrowed these terms to talk about transformation of the soul, transformation of the heart, or in this case, transformation of the heart through gaining closeness to understanding the Quran. So what is al-kibrit al-ahmar in this situation? Before I go into that, I want to just so that we understand the example, let's use another example that's also mentioned in the books about changing the self. And it's something that's mentioned by Shaykh Muhammad Maulud in his book, The Purification of the Heart, which is a book that we teach here at Taiba Foundation to our students in prison. And then we have also classes that are available like this to all people. You don't have to go to jail or prison to benefit from our educational programs and resources. Sometimes I saw actually one time a comment somebody made on one of our posts. This was a while back, says, oh, Taiba offers such great education, it makes me want to go to prison to be able to have access to that. And I want to tell people, no, you don't have to. I know he was just joking, but you don't have to do that. You can order our books online. You can reach out to us and we can see how we can help you or your community in your path of seeking knowledge. So in the book of Shaykh Muhammad Maulud on the purification of the heart, he calls intentions iksirul amal, the elixir of action. So intentions are the elixir of action. So just like we had this non-precious metal, we're going to add the elixir to it, and now it's going to become precious. So how does that happen? Say, for example, somebody wants to drink water. Well, This action, is this action getting you closer to Allah? If you don't have an intention with that, you're just drinking water. But once you put that elixir, that iksir, that philosopher's stone on it, which is the intention, I intend by drinking this water to get closer to Allah by preserving my body, because preservation of the body that Allah has given us as a gift is an obligation. So now it makes that action of drinking water an obligation. Same thing occurs with eating food. And you could go on for use many examples. In the Madkhal of Ibn al-Hajj, he gives over 90 intentions that a person can make for going to the restroom. 120 for going to the masjid. You just keep piling it on, and now you've turned that into even more purer gold. Every action that a person is doing. It can also be applied to leaving disobedience. So one of the things also that I learned from my teacher, Murabat Muhammad al-Amin, Haddamin, he said, Rami, when you see something that's a prohibition and you're already not doing it, you're not getting any reward. You're not getting sin, but you're also not getting reward by avoiding that prohibition. But if you make the intention that you are consciously avoiding that thing because it's haram, now you get a reward for that avoidance. So let's take walking down the liquor store aisle or the liquor aisle in a store. You go to pick up a gallon of milk and some bread at the store. You walk down the liquor aisle. If you're over 21 and you have the money, theoretically you can buy that liquor and drink it. Now, if you just walk by, you're avoiding sin. Alhamdulillah, so we didn't incur the sin. But we're also not getting reward by avoiding it until we make that conscious realization. I could partake in that if I wanted to, but I'm not, for the sake of Allah. Now, the same action is happening. I'm walking down that aisle. I'm passing by the gambling cards at the quick stop shop. When I'm buying something over there, passing by the liquor, seeing there's something haram, lower my gaze, and now I make the intention. I'm doing that for the sake of Allah. So then that makes the action of avoidance of sin a form of ibadah. Okay, so that's the iksirul amal, the elixir, the philosopher's stone for the red sulfur for the action. Now, Imam Ghazali is going to say, what is that red stone in the Quran? What is that thing in the Quran that if we gain it and we understand it, changes everything? He said it's the first of these 6 categories, and and below it has 3 other categories, and it's the knowledge of Allah. The knowledge of Allah is that secret in the Quran that changes everything else after it. That is the elixir, that is iksir that changes everything else. And in that, there are 3 sub-elements to it. So, and he gives these three, the title, these jewels: a ruby, a sapphire, a blue sapphire, and then a yellow sapphire. So we have red ruby, blue sapphire, and then the yellow sapphire. Al-Yaqut al-Akhab, al-Yaqut al-Asfar, and then al-Yaqut al-Ahmar. So a red sapphire, a blue sapphire, and a yellow sapphire. These 3 sapphires, once they're brought together, they comprise al-Kibrit al-Ahmar, this red sulfur that's never been found. The alchemists tried for hundreds of years to find it, to change lead into gold. They couldn't find it. He's saying, well, borrowing that terminology, we're going to bring it over here and we're going to say, yes, there is something that can change everything. It's knowledge of Allah, and that red sulfur is made up of 3 jewels: a red, blue, and a yellow sapphire. You get these 3 together, you got the red sulfur. What are each one of these? So the first one, the red ruby or the red sapphire, is knowledge of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the essence of Allah. The third one is knowledge of his sifat, his attributes, and the third one is his af'al, his actions. So we have knowledge of Allah, knowledge of his attributes, and knowledge of his actions. These 3 are each one of those jewels. The red ruby is knowledge of Allah, or the symbol for that we're going to use. In fact, I was thinking, you know, a person, if they have a mushaf where they're able to, or like a study of the Quran, they could use these symbols to kind of remind them what each section is. So it's the, and I'm going to give examples, and also using Surah Al-Fatiha and some of the shorter surahs that we're used to reciting on a regular basis. So we have the red sapphire, which symbolizes, or which is a symbol for knowledge of Allah. Blue ruby or blue sapphire, knowledge of the attributes, the sifat of Allah. And then the yellow, which are the knowledge of the af'al. So where do we find that in Surah Al-Fatiha? Because one of the things that Imam Ghazali is showing us is that these 6 categories, with their subcategories being 10, he said this is all of the Quran. Once you understand these 10 categories, every single verse that you read, you can put it into one of those sections, one of those categories. And the entire Quran is summarized by Surah Al-Fatiha. So if we know that these 6 categories and then the 10 are found in the entire Quran, then we should also find the 6 in Surah Al-Fatiha. So let's begin. So now we have the first major one, which has the subcategory of 3, which is the red sulfur, and that's the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find what is the ma'rifah of that. What is the knowledge of the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Of course, in the Surah Al-Fatiha, considering that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is from the Surah Al-Fatiha, because of course, Imams like Imam Shafi'i consider the Basmala to be a verse of the Quran, whereas other scholars like Imam Malik do not consider it. But if we're considering it, and Imam Ghazali was a Shafi'i, so if we're considering it an ayah of the Quran, we find it right there when Allah says Allah. When he says Allah, that is referring to the that of Allah, the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right after that, he says Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the merciful, the compassionate, or however else we're going to translate it. But those two, they are names of Allah, but they're attributes. They're explaining to us what, you know, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. One of the things that Imam Al-Ghazali mentions in this text, Jewels of the Quran, he says most of what you will find in terms of the that are very few. There's very few ayahs where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to the that. And I'm going to give examples. He says most of what you find is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning the sifat, what his attributes are and what his actions are. So you'll find most of the things where Allah is describing himself, he's describing himself, his attributes and his af'al. But very rarely does he mention the that, just his name. And there was a point that Imam Al-Ghazali had mentioned in here that I wanted to okay, so he says that the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mention the essence, you know, the ma'rifah, knowledge about his essence, is that it's very difficult to understand. And so since it's very difficult to comprehend, there's not much mention of it in the Quran. أضيقه مجالا وأعسرها منالا وأعصاها على الفكر. And so he said, because of this, the Quran, you'll find that the Quran only mentions it indirectly. There's indirectly, and very rarely does it mention this. Like, for example, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Laysa kamithlihi shay', there's nothing like him. So he's trying to explain to us who he is. When he does, he says, Laysa kamithlihi shay', there's nothing like him. So even in the description of him, is a reminder to us he's incomprehensible. It's like what some of the early generations of the Sahaba would say, and this saying we find it with multiple of the early generations. Sometimes it's attributed to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, sometimes it's attributed to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, but basically al-ajzu an idrakihi idrak, realizing that the incapacity to comprehend Allah is comprehension of Allah. The fact that we cannot understand who he really is, now we've understand who he is. We've understood that he's incomprehensible. Our human intellects are created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is uncreated. We're bound by time and place and space. He is unbound by time, place, and taking up space. So because of this, examples like Laysa kamithlihi shay and Surah Al-Ikhlas are giving us indications of who he is, but it's not going into detail. He says, as for the sifat, his attributes, that's something that's a little bit more comprehensible. It's nearer for our intellects to comprehend, and so we see more of this. We see the 99 names of Allah. We see all of the attributes of how Allah describes himself. So you see descriptions about his ilm, about his ability, his qudra, his hayat, the fact that he's living and he never dies, his kalam, his speech, the hikmah, that he's al-hakim al-alim, that he's the wise, the hearing, that Allah hears everything, his basar. So you see these throughout the Quran. You'll see these more. And then Imam Ghazali says, as for af'al, as for actions, this is something that there's no end to it, because it's not only is it mentioned in the Quran, but it's all around us. It's all around us. So even though the Quran, there's ayat in the Quran, and there's nothing like the Quran, there's also ayat in his creation. And later on in the book, Imam Ghazali actually, and I'll talk about this next week, about how we approach the study of the Quran and what is the purpose of the Quran. But one of the things that he mentions in that is that there's actions of Allah all around us. It's happening all the time. And these are referred to as ayat, as signs. Just like we refer to the verses in the Quran as ayat, as signs. So if we want to understand Allah, it's the indications, his af'al, his actions are all around us of what he is doing. He's bringing the rain down. He's bringing the sun up, the moon, the heavens, the earth, the trees, life, rivers, mountains. All of that are the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if we look in going back to Fatiha, we start off, if we say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. So right there in the Basmala, we have Allah mentioning his name, his that. Who is Allah? Now everything else is going to explain to us who is Allah. But at the end of the day, Laysa kamithlihi shay, there's nothing like him, and we cannot comprehend him. But we get some indication of who he is through his description of himself, which are the sifat, the attributes, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then we find Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Again, the mention of the that again. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of the worlds. Now, the Lord of the worlds, this is his name, or I should say the Lord of creation, Al-Alameen. And sometimes you'll see it translated in different ways, but Al-Alam with a fatha on the lam is anything that is created. So he is the Lord of creation. So even though this is a name of Allah, it's connected to his creation in that he is the Lord. He is the creator, the cherisher, the sustainer of all of creation. And so now he's indicating to us his action by saying Rabbil Alameen. So just in those first two ayahs, or in the first ayah, according to Imam Malik, we find these three jewels. We find the ma'rifat that, knowledge of the essence of God. We find the knowledge of the sifat, the attributes of God, and knowledge of the af'al. Now, before I go on to the next, are there any questions, and you can post them into the comment section, about understanding that? The first three jewels that Imam Ghazali is mentioning. And then we'll go on to the second. Now, the other thing I'm going to ask you, especially for those of you who are going to stick with us and go through all three of these, is to, as you're putting these together and taking notes, to make a chart. And then I'm going to ask you to share those charts with me. I have a chart that I made, and I'm looking at it, but I'm not going to share it just yet because I want you to do some work too. This is a lesson after all, and there's going to be some homework. I know it's Ramadan, but this homework is getting you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through understanding the Quran. And I went back through, because his text was so dense in terms of listing out things and examples. I said I need a chart, so I actually made a chart, and it helped me. And I'm actually teaching from the chart more than I'm teaching from the book. I have the book here. I'm going to go for the examples Imam Ghazali mentions, but I want you to make a chart, and then I'm going to ask folks to share the charts that they make. I don't know if in the comment section here it's like WhatsApp where you can share PDFs, but we'll find out. Maybe some more of those who are familiar. So we have those, and then the other thing, that's what I did too. In my chart, I pulled out images from online of those various jewels. So you want to get an image for that jewel, for the red, the blue, and the yellow sapphires, what its and what its description is. Okay, so Imam Ghazali says, let's see here. Okay, so those are the first three. Then now we go on to the next jewel that he mentions, which is the pearl. He uses as a symbol the pearl, and there's actually two types of pearls, or two elements to this pearl, but it's just one. It's one jewel, and that pearl is dhikr as-sirat al-mustaqim, mention of the straight path. Mention of the straight path. Knowledge of the divine, or the knowledge of the straight path. And this has two elements to it, both purifying yourself from blameworthy qualities and adorning yourself with praiseworthy qualities. So that's the knowledge of the Sirat al-Mustaqim. We of course, there it is in Surah Al-Fatiha. Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. Guide us to the straight path. What is in that straight path? There's these two elements. The elements of ridding ourselves, ridding our souls, ridding our hearts of blameworthy qualities, qualities like enmity, treachery, rancor, jealousy, arrogance, blameworthy pride, blameworthy hate, love of this world that's not a proper love of this world. And there's a whole different discussion of the various types of love of this world. But anything that's a blameworthy quality, that's the tazkiyah, removing it, tazkiyah, or the takhliyah, the removal of those things, and then adorning ourselves with the praiseworthy qualities, patience, humility, and so on. Gratitude, shukr. So that's the pearl. So we'll find this where Imam Ghazali calls this mulazama and mukhalafa. What are we supposed to do and what are we supposed to leave, both outwardly and inwardly? And I mentioned the diseases of the heart, but it also goes to, don't drink wine, but make sure you drink water and stay hydrated, because you have to preserve your body. Don't eat pork, but eat food, eat something. So it's following the commands and avoiding the prohibitions. These two elements, knowledge of these two elements, of what we have to avoid and get rid of, and what we have to do and keep, that's the knowledge of the divine, of the path, of the straight path, the Sirat al-Mustaqim. And this is what Imam al-Ghazali uses as a symbol for it, the pearl. And then its example in Surah in the Fatiha is Sirat al-Mustaqim. I want to back up I want to back up for a moment to talk about the three rubies, the red, the blue, and the yellow. And Imam al-Ghazali mentions a little bit later on in the text something very interesting about Ayatul Kursi. And he says one of the reasons why Ayatul Kursi was called Sayyidatul Ayat, the queen or the princess of the ayat, of the verses. And again, when it's very interesting when these terms are used, like what images are coming up. The Surah Al-Rahman is referred to as the bride of the Quran. Yasin is the heart of the Quran. The Ayatul Kursi is the princess, or the Sayyidatul Ayat of the verses. Why is it? And so he said it's very interesting because in Ayatul Kursi, look at it. In fact, I will and that one nice thing about Imam Ghazali's book is that he actually speaks to the reader. I found that very, like, he's writing almost 1,000 years ago, but when you're reading, it's as if he's speaking to you. In fact, one point during when I was I had made a note, I said, I don't understand this, and I put a note to myself, like, I don't understand that. And then literally 3 lines later, he says, لعلك تقول فاكشف عن وجه العلاقة بين العالمين وأن الرؤيا. He says, maybe you're asking yourself, or maybe you're saying, what's the connection between these two? And I said, subhanallah. In fact, I wrote that in my comments. I said, subhanallah. I had just literally asked the question. I was like, what's the connection between these two? And then he says, maybe you're asking yourself, what's the connection between your two? So it's like we're having a conversation with this wonderful man, rahimahullah. Okay, so he says about Ayatul Kursi. Okay, here he says, he explains why Ayatul Kursi is called the Sayyida, the princess of the verses. And then he says, فَإِن كُنْتَ تَعْجِزُ عَنْ إِسْتِنْبَاطِهِ بِتَفَكُّرِكَ فَارْجِعْ إِلَى الْأَقْسَامِ الَّتِي ذَكَرْنَاهَا. If you can't understand why Ayatul Kursi would be called the princess or the queen of the verses, then go back to the categories that we mentioned. And then he says, and then he gives the answer, but I'm not going to read the answer, and you don't have to do it right now. But after this, one of the homework that you can mention is, after understanding these categories, now read Ayatul Kursi with those categories, but don't jump ahead just yet, because we have to get through the rest of the rest of them. And you want to see which jewels you can find in Ayatul Kursi. Once you identify the jewels in Ayatul Kursi, you'll say, oh, this is why it's called Sayyida, the queen of the verses. So we have knowledge of the divine path. Then the next one is the green emerald. So out of the 10 categories, this is number 5. The pearl is the red, blue, and yellow sapphires are 1, 2, 3. The pearl, even though it's 1, it's 4 and 5 because it has those 2 elements of following and avoiding. And then number 6 is az-zubujrud al-akhdar, green emerald. And this is knowledge of the hereafter, knowledge of the akhirah, the ma'ad. And Imam Ghazali says, this is any verse that describes the state that you will be in the next life, what you will get in terms of reward. And so not just not any aspect of the next life, but the reward that you would get in the next life. So the Jannah and seeing Allah, which we have to remember that the greatest punishment in the next life, wal-iyadhu billah, and we seek refuge in Allah from that, is not being able to see Allah. So it's not the hellfire. It's not the punishments of the hellfire and all of that, as horrible as those as the imagination can comprehend it. And may Allah protect you and your families and us all and our families from the hellfire. But that's not the worst punishment in the akhirah. It's not being able to see Allah. So the reward of seeing Allah, the reward of Jannah, and everything else that we get to be able to meet the Prophet ﷺ and drink from his hands, Ya Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen, at the Hawd, all of that is any ayahs, any verses that you find that are talking about that, you can think in your mind, this is the green emerald. Now, one thing, when I was trying to correlate it to Surah Al-Fatiha, I connected it with Maliki Yawm ad-Din, because there's the mention of Yawm ad-Din, which is part of the next life. And even though the Qiyamah, the Yawm ad-Din, the resurrection and the judgment day, is a time where there is going to be a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of hopelessness, and a lot of punishment as well in the actual day, even before going into the hellfire for those who are destined to it. Wal-iyadhu billah, and we seek refuge in Allah from that. There's a type of reward that occurs even on the plane of Yawm al-Qiyamah. And think about it, if you see the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam over there, and he's at his hawd, he's at his basin, and it stretches the distance from Medina all the way to Yemen, and there's cups all the way around it, like the likeness of stars, and he's there, and he wants everybody who followed his sunnah from his ummah to drink from that. and he's pushing away those who were Muslims, but they did not follow his sunnah. And we seek refuge in Allah from being those who are pushed away from the hawd of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But imagine we get the reward of being able to drink from his hawd and get that reward on Yawm al-Qiyamah. That is a huge type of blessing. So Yawm al-Din, when we hear that in the Surah Al-Fatiha, it is reminding us about a difficulty that will occur, but there's also that reward that will also occur on that day. Let me just check any questions. I'm going to just give a wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to all those who gave me salams. I can see there's a number of different salams that were there, and just to fulfill the obligation of the sunnah of returning the salams to everybody. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Okay, the next one, number 7, is al-ambar al-ashhab, ambergris. Ambergris, and he uses gray ambergris. Amber is not actually a jewel or a stone. It's something that comes out of whales, and it's very, very rare, and it's actually quite expensive. But ambergris, maybe I'm pronouncing it ambar, basically amber. It's something that comes out of the whale. It's part of its something that happens in its digestive tract, and then it regurgitates it. It's in the ocean. It floats up, and sometimes it shows up on shore. So this regurgitated whale gastrointestinal stuff has a very a perfume-like smell, and so people use it in perfumes. It's very very expensive as well, and there's some articles online. If you're not familiar with it, just read some articles online about it. And it's also a reminder to us that even some of the most coveted things in this dunya, if you think about them, they got an element of something that's actually kind of disgusting. And Imam Ali, karamallahu wajhahu, may Allah ennoble his face, and Allah had ennobled his face. And the reason why we say that too, sometimes people hear, radiyallahu anhu for other Sahaba, but karamallahu wajhahu, is because unlike other Sahaba who may have at some point in their life before Islam prostrated to idols, Ali radiallahu anhu never prostrated to an idol, and so Allah made his face radiant and honored his face, that his face never prostrated to an idol, even before he took his shahada and became a Muslim, one of the first Muslims, and a Muslim as a child, so he was the first of the children to become Muslim, radiallahu anhu. He said that it's enough for us when we reflect on the nature of the dunya to think about some of the best elements of it, that it has this kind of foul aspect to it. So for example, one of the best drinks, something that we can drink, is honey. But if we think about it, where does honey come from? It's a regurgitation of flies. One of the best fabrics that this dunya can offer is silk. What is that? It's worm spit, nefathatu dudin. And if you look at, it goes on and on. But even this, here's amber. Here's another example. Amber it's a regurgitated thing out of the belly of a whale. And normally, I mean, it's a form of like, I'm not going to say vomit or regurgitated food, because I don't think that's a scientifically proper way of describing it. But it is something that's regurgitated, and it's organic in its nature. So it's from the animal. Or musk, which is this coagulated blood from a certain type of deer. And he's also going to mention that in this list. It's basically curdled blood. Or the next one, which he uses, is oud. Oud is basically infected, rotten wood that has been, it's been infected by a certain infection, and then it rots. And the more it rots and the more the infection, the better it smells. So that should be a reminder to us to reflect on some of the nature of the dunya. Okay, so he talks about the amber, the gray amber. And he said this one is a symbol for knowledge of the conditions of the seekers. ذكر أحوال الأولياء. Just had a typo in my chart. I had to fix it. ذكر أحوال الأولياء. So mentioning the state of the friends of Allah, the awliya. And so the way these are mentioned in the Quran is through the stories of those who are traveling the path to Allah, through the stories of the prophets and the story of the awliya. So anytime you hear one of the stories of in the Quran, that it's in this category. Allah is telling us what is the state of those people. What did they go through? The prophets, all of their stories that are mentioned in the Quran. The longest story, whether it's the Surah Yusuf or the Surah of Musa alayhi salam, and there's also many references to things that happened to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his life, and the stories and things that occurred to him. So, and then there's the awliya as well. There's description of the Sahaba and what did they do? لقد رضي الله عن الذين يبايعونك تحت الشجرة لقد رضي الله عن المؤمنين إذ يبايعونك تحت الشجرة. Allah has become pleased with the believers when they did their bay'ah with you under the tree, bay'at al-Ridwan. So Allah is telling us that. He's telling us many other stories of the Sahaba, of individuals, of them as a group, radiallahu anhum. He's also telling us stories of previous peoples, like in the story in Surah Yasin, وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ. And then a man came from the far ends of the village to tell the people of the town, follow the messengers. So when Allah is telling us that story, He's telling us the knowledge of the awliya. That man was not a prophet, but he was one of the awliya. Then there's other stories as well, like Dhul Qarnayn, who according to some was a prophet, but the majority of scholars say that he was not a prophet. Dhul Qarnayn, Iskandar, Alexander, also Luqman al-Hakim. According to the dominant, he was not a prophet, but a wali. We hear his story. There's a whole surah named after him. So Allah is telling us all of these stories, the ahwal, the states of the salikin, the mention of Maryam alayhi salam, and the mention of the mother of Musa alayhi salam, and all of those stories of the people who are prophets or non-prophets, but they were awliya. We find that in the Quran. That's its own category, and Imam Ghazali symbolizes it with amber. Okay, and now the next one is the aloes wood, the oud. And so this is category number 8. Category number 8 is the oud. He says oud al-ratab al-andar. So he says أما العود فهو عبارة عند الخلق عن الجسم في الأجسام لا ينتفع به ولكن إذا ألقي على النار حتى احترق في نفسه تصاعد منه دخان منتشر فينتهي إلى المشام فيعظم نفعه وجدواه ويطيب مورده وملقاه. Okay, so he says oud, when you mention incense or wood, what it basically triggers in the mind of people in terms of their imagination of their conceptualization of what this is. So you have incense, whether it's oud or otherwise. He's using the oud because he just picked one. But he says when you mention oud to a person, it's something, and I have some oud over there, but when you pick up a piece of oud and you look at it, it has a slight smell if you get it close, but it doesn't really have the full capacity of its smell while it's unburned. So think of a stick of incense, a piece of oud, whatever it is. Unburned, it doesn't have its full benefit. But once it's placed on heat, then now you get some incense that comes out, goes into your nose, and now you can fully appreciate what this has to offer. So as I'm reading it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, oud, it's a something that's interesting to see, to think about, to smell, definitely. But what is it that he's talking about? And what can this be as example of, a symbol of something in the Quran? And he said, this is symbolic of the hypocrites and the enemies of Allah. And he uses something very interesting about the hypocrites. Think for a moment, what is one of the descriptions, and actually let's do this interactive. On the comment section, what is a description of the hypocrites in the Quran? What is something that they're known for? And let's see, normally I'd be able to sip some water, but it's still daytime, so that would be haram for me. But I'm going to take a break. And what are some, and you answer this question, what are some of the descriptions of the hypocrites in the Quran? Let's see who's quickest on the draw. What are they described as? Okay, so somebody says they don't keep their trusts. Yes, they don't keep their trust. What else? Okay, Harold, I'll give you the hint. How were they described as sitting in the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So when the hypocrites, when they go to the prayer, exactly, they're lazy in the praise. وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى. When they get up for prayer, it's prayer time again. Because remember, they had to maintain this outward vision of Islam. Okay, they're inconsistent inwardly and outwardly. Yes, they are dishonest and do not keep their word. Saying with their tongues, Khalil, Assalamu alaikum, how are you doing, brother? With their tongues, what's not in their heart. Yes, and there we got it. Khushubun musannada. Thank you, Saima. They are like pieces of wood leaned up against the wall. So if you can imagine a wall with a bunch of planks, boards of wood, and they're leaned up against the wall. They're not moving. They're there. It's just like, well, you're not engaged. And the Sahaba, they were described as when they were in the presence of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were so still and attentive. It was as if birds could land on their heads. What it means is that they were still as statues. That's how much reverence they had for the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whereas the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, they were there in the back of the masjid, always late, always back row, leaning up against the masjid, like khushub and musannada. And when they leave, they would say things like "Mada qala anifan?" What was he talking about in there? They're not even engaged with him when they're there or when they've left. And thank you everybody for who's mentioned the various descriptions that are there. They have disease in their heart. They show faith in front of the believers, but they show their true faces when they're away from the believers. Yes, all of these descriptions are of the hypocrites. But the one Imam Ghazali is referring to here is what is a khushubun musannada. They are like pieces of wood. They are like pieces of wood. And so Imam Ghazali, for them, for the hypocrites and the enemies of Allah, and the people who disbelieve in Allah, he said they are like aloes wood. And then I'm reading this, I'm thinking like, okay, I see the connection. I see the connection of they are like the wood, but how is it connected to the incense? And then he said it's because while they're in this world, they're not going to do any dhikr or recognition of Allah. But when they're thrown in the hellfire, and now read any of the ayahs that talk about the Quran, what is the hypocrites and the enemies of Allah when they're thrown in the hellfire, and what they say is recorded in the Quran. Look at that. Look at that tone of speech, and that what exactly are they saying in those instances, as opposed to when they're here in the dunya. So it's just like that piece of oud. When it was not affected by fire, you can't smell anything. You can't see what is its full attention. You put it on some heat. You put it on a coal. You put it on some other type of something to burn it. And now all of a sudden, you see the good smell and the potential of that oud come out. The same thing with the hypocrites and the enemies of Allah. When they're thrown in the hellfire, all of a sudden now they start calling out to Allah. So they believe and they're making dua and they're calling out. And when I read this, I said, "A'udhu billah, I seek refuge in Allah." It's a really, really scary thought to think about. That if for a person to be in that state where they're thrown into the hellfire, and then their benefit and their potential is coming out, it can only come out in the akhirah. They're witnessing the oneness of Allah. They're calling out to Allah. They're doing dhikr. They're doing dua and praying to Allah. Only comes out once they're thrown on the fire. A'udhu billah. We want that benefit to come out here in this dunya. Now, about this type of the oud, the fresh aloes wood, Imam Ghazali says there's three categories. There's three types within this category. Or sorry, I should say there's three ways that they denied that they got this status. One is that they mention something about Allah that is not acceptable. They mention something about Allah that is not acceptable. So what does that mean? There are people who believe in Allah, but they will say things about Allah. They're like, yeah, I believe in God, but then they just let their tongue go and they'll say things. So, for example, there's a story in the Quran that's referred to in the Quran where a group of people in Medina said that Allah is a faqir. He's poor. A'udhu billah. Why? Because Allah had in one of the verses previous to that says, "Man alladhi yuqridu Allah qardan hasana." Who will give a beautiful loan to Allah? Meaning, who's going to give out money in this world, spend on His creation of those in need, and building things, schools, towns, cities, roads, bridges, masajid, and so forth? Who will do that? And then you'll get your reward in the akhirah. So it's like a loan, but it's not that he needs that money. We understood that. But there were some people in Medina who just, they believed in Allah and they believed in the prophets before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then they said Allah is a faqir. So they said something that was very, very not only inappropriate, but it should never be said about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a type of a person who becomes an enemy of Allah. They believe in God, but they just say things that are not proper. The second type are the people who mention things about the prophets or about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they believe in God, but then they're going to start saying things about this prophet. And belief, iman, is a complete package. We can't just say we believe in Allah, but we don't need these prophets, or we believe in the Quran and we don't need the Sunnah and the Hadith. No, you believe in Allah, His angels, His prophets, His books, the next day, the next life. Al-Yawm al-Akhir. So if somebody believes in Allah and says, I believe in God, I don't say anything about it, but I'm going to say things about Muhammad, I'm going to say things about Musa, I'm going to say things about Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad alayhi salam, and ala nabiyyina afdalus salatu wassalam, and upon our prophet be the most blessed peace and blessings. So they say those things. The third are those who deny the next life, the hereafter. They deny the resurrection. They deny the day of judgment. They deny paradise. They deny the hellfire. They deny that there's a punishment for disobedience and a reward for obedience. So this would be like people who are basically atheists, and there may be other types as well, people who maybe they claim to believe in God or act as if they believe in God, and they will respect the prophets and read their biographies and try to get moral guidance from their lives as human beings, but they look at all of us as just advanced amoebas and cells, just everything came together by itself. So I can say I believe in God and I won't say anything bad about the prophets, but I don't believe in all of that hereafter stuff. Once I die, I become worm food. So if a person's in that state, that's also, wal-iyadhu billah, and we seek refuge in Allah from that. Oh, and let me back up a little bit too. So these last two, the amber and the aloes wood, the ambar and the oud, where are they in Surah Al-Fatiha? Well, the stories of the seekers of God is Sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim. Guide us to the straight path. What is that path? The path of those who you have blessed with. And in another verse of the Quran, it says, min al-nabiyyina was-siddiqina was-shuhada. And those that an'amta alayhim are described as the prophets, the anbiya, the siddiqeen, the people who are the siddiqs, which that was a special category, and the shuhada and the martyrs. So not everybody becomes a martyr, and not everybody becomes a siddiq. And it was interesting for me to read about in the Jewish tradition, they have this title, the siddiq, T-Z, and I can't remember the rest of it, but starts, look it up. It's very interesting because we have Yusuf alayhi salam. He was a Nabi, he was a prophet, but he was also referred to as a siddiq. They recognize him. Yeah, he was siddiq, that he was a special person. Who do we have in our ummah? Is Abu Bakr. He was a Siddiq. So this is the Siddiq is a certain type of awliya, the shuhada, the martyrs, another type of awliya. So that's the example from Surah Al-Fatiha. And then if we're talking about the oud, what is the example from Surah Al-Fatiha? غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Those who you have incurred your wrath, and those who are astray. Okay, then the last two categories, and we only have 5 more minutes. And again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in on the comment section. But we'll wrap up in 5 minutes. And then next week we'll continue on, and hopefully you can, if you've been taking notes or you review this video, you can put a chart together and please share the chart. I would love to see how everybody comes up with something, both images, artwork, charts, you know, Excel sheets, however you want to put it together. The last two are not really jewels. The first one, he says, at-tiryaq al-akbar. This is the best antidote. And then number 10 is al-misk al-adfar, the strongest musk. So we have the best antidote and the strongest musk. The first one, which is the best antidote, number 9 of the 10 categories that Imam Ghazali lists out, it's knowledge of the arguments against the non-believers. So we have the non-believers, and they're giving their arguments on why they either don't believe in God, or why they don't want to follow his orders, or why they pick and choose. Okay, we'll follow some of Musa's orders or some of Isa's orders, but we're not going to follow Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's orders, or among some of the people at the time of the Prophet or after him, that will follow some of Muhammad's orders, but not all of them. So everybody has their arguments that they're presenting about belief, non-belief, action, non-action, and so forth, and Allah responds to those. And so in that process of responding to all of those, the arguments of the non-believers, this is the best antidote. If we understand those arguments and we understand the refutation of those arguments, then now we have the best antidote. And he says, from this subject, from these type of verses, يَتَشَعَّبُ مِنْهُ عِلْمُ الْكَلَامِ. The science of theology, the science of aqidah, of kalam, comes out of this one section. So if you know, you read a verse in the Quran that says, if there were multiple gods in the universe, if it was possible, in the heavens and the earth, لَفَسَدَتَا. If, and it's also an if-then statement, if there were multiple gods, the heavens and the earth would have been corrupt. They would have not been able to maintain this system. So when we look around and we see, because we don't see that corruption in the heavens of the earth, we see a perfect system, then we know it's only one God in complete control. Because if you had multiple gods, it's like in the Greek mythology, they're always fighting with each other over power. And ultimately, even if one is the most powerful of all of them, he is not completely powerful. You're only completely powerful if you do not share your power with anybody else. So understanding the knowledge of the arguments against the non-believers, this is the best antidote, and it's the source of ilm al-kalam, of the science of theology. It's number 9 in Imam al-Ghazali's 10 categories. The last one is al-misk al-adfar, which is the strongest musk, and he says, فهو عبارة في عالم الشهادة عن شيء يستصحبه الإنسان فيؤثر منه رائحة طيبة. He said the reason why he chose this is because if you think about musk, if a person puts on musk, and this could be any type, puts on perfume, it's hidden. Like he says, say you have some musk, you have some powder musk of that form, and you carry it in your jacket. And then we're talking about the original musk, which much of what's being sold is synthetic versions. But if you get pure musk, it has a very pungent fragrance. And if you're carrying it, even if you're carrying it inside of your clothes, that fragrance is going to emit outside of you. So he says, if you think about this as the imagery, the metaphor that we're using, something that you have inside that's hidden, that people can't really see, but parts of its fragrance are emitted, and others can tell that you have it. And he said, this is the knowledge of the preparation for the journey, which is through ذكر حدود الأحكام, knowledge of the rules. So we find in the Quran there's knowledge of theology, there's also knowledge of actions, how to pray, how to fast, how to do hajj, halal and haram, what food is allowed, what is not allowed. All of those ayats, all of those verses that talk about rules, that is symbolized by Imam al-Ghazali with musk. And it's something that, you know, once a person takes on that, following the rules, you can't really see that. You know, if you see a Muslim walking down the street, you can't see all of his prayers and his hajj and his umrah and his fasting. You can't see, if it's a Muslimah sister, you can't see all of the fasts and the patience and the sadaqah that she's given. But there's something about that person that has emitted a type of radiance, and you could tell. And I'm sure everybody has had that experience where you meet somebody and you just realize, you're like, wow, this is a good person. Well, how can you tell? You don't see anything. You didn't see him pray. You didn't see him give charity. You didn't see him up at night praying. You didn't see him making dua. You didn't see him being good. No, but I could tell this brother or this sister is a really good person. And that's like the musk. So mashallah, Imam Ghazali has a really, really amazing imagery that he's giving us, and also for us to be able to then read the Quran. So he says this is the knowledge of the hudud. And next week I'm going to talk about these two, because if you notice, these last two, there's not a correlation in Surah Al-Fatiha. I mean, maybe we could try to fit it in somewhere, but there's not really. The other ones are. And Imam Al-Ghazali has a reason for that. He said there's a reason why these are actually the end of the list. So sometimes when we think about Islam, we say, oh, I need to study theology and fiqh. And here we're Taiba Foundation, we're an educational institute, and we're teaching. We have taught thousands of Muslims in prison, and we can help support their education afterwards. And that's some of our subjects that we teach. We teach theology and we teach fiqh, and we all need to know it. It's part of being Muslim. You have to know what to believe and what to how to practice it. But he says there's a reason why in approaching the Quran, these are actually at the end of the list, and we'll explore that next week. So please join us for that session, same time, and I would say same bat channel, same bat time, but this is Facebook, so it's all, I guess it's the Taiba channel that we're going to be using. So we'll end there. Jazakumullahu khairan for attending and listening. And if you have any questions, there's in the comment section. If you do have any questions, you can email it to info@taibafoundation.org. You can email the charts if you have a PDF of a chart that you finish, and any questions that you might have, you can submit them through our email, and then I'll answer them in next week's session. Again, if you'd like to get the book, it's called The Jewels of the Quran. In Arabic, it's Jawahirul Quran. Jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah bless you and bless your families, and allow us all to reap even more benefits from this Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.